We're joined now by U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Secretary, thank you. Let's dive right in. Let's take a look at the numbers here in North Carolina when it comes to the American Rescue Plan. $5.6 billion goes directly to the state. $3.6 billion goes to towns, municipalities, that sort of thing. $3.69 million for schools. And the White House estimates nearly 90% of North Carolinians are receiving that $1,400 check. I know the plan in general promises to cut poverty in half. That's big. I mean, that's a generational shift, a lot of numbers. But let me ask you this question. Last year, we heard stories of stimulus loans going out to companies that didn't deserve it. So with something so large, what will the president, what will the federal government do to make sure that you are being good stewards of our taxpayer money?
Well, we're talking about a lot of taxpayer dollars, and so we've got to make sure that it gets invested well and according to the president's intent. We're working to make sure that we do that with the dollars that are coming through the Department of Transportation, making sure we have the right controls, and at the same time, making sure that these dollars get out promptly. You know, there's a bit of a tension. On one hand, we've got to make sure these resources are deployed quickly. On the other hand, not so quickly that we don't know where they're being spent. And that's a balance that I'm proud to say we're working very hard, and I think so far being very effective at striking.
What about a year from now? What is your barometer for success? You and I speak a year from right now in March of next year. What can I hold you to as a barometer for success?
Well, I'd want us to be able to know that we are out of the woods economically. Look, some of the effects of COVID will be with us for as long as we live, but the crisis, this sense of being on the edge of a cliff all the time in terms of our economy, in terms of families' well-being, this American Rescue Plan is designed to put an end to that. It's also going to lift more than 100,000 children out of poverty in North Carolina alone. These are the kinds of things, the kinds of historic things that we were able to do with this rescue plan so that we could get the country back on track and start thinking about the future. So hopefully by the time you and I are speaking a year from now, it's not how do we get out of this COVID emergency, rather it's a conversation about the long term.
All right, speaking of long term, let's talk transportation. That is now your wheelhouse. Charlotte is kind of a victim of its own success, growing faster than most other cities in the U.S. We want to expand things like light rail, streetcar, commuter rail, greenways, bike lanes, you name it, we want it. But it's always, as long as I've been covering it, and for the decades before that, always been dependent on federal money, because so much comes from that. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. I speak on behalf of the city of Charlotte and our leaders. What do you need from us so we can get that money?
Well, first of all, you know, Charlotte is recognized for a lot of innovative thinking when it comes to serving residents well. As you say, growth is a good thing to have, but it creates a lot of challenges. What we want to do as a federal agency is partner with communities like Charlotte, regions like your part of the state, and make sure that we are, let's say, user-friendly as you're trying to approach us for technical assistance or for dollars. We've tried to write that into the criteria as grant programs are going out. For example, we have an infrastructure grant program called Infra, where we talked about the things we expect from economic vitality to paying attention to things like equity and climate, because those really are involved in the consequences of infrastructure decisions. But it's music to my ears when I hear you talking about a multimodal approach. In other words, talking about, yes, roads, but also thinking about things like bicycle transportation, light rail, or other forms of public transit. We need to make sure that residents have as many options as possible, good ways to get to work or where they need to be. And that's what really unlocks the economic potential of transportation.
The people, the leaders here in Charlotte will be tickled to hear you say something like that, because they've been talking about the same stuff over the last couple of decades. You just mentioned it, but you talk about infrastructure projects, something that often has some bipartisan appeal when you're talking about roads, bridges, water, that sort of thing. But I know the president also includes, and you mentioned it briefly, things like climate change, clean energy, racial justice. That might be a tough sell for some Republicans. Why are things like that also a big part of transportation plans?
Well, because we've learned that our transportation choices have consequences. My predecessor, who is, of course, from Charlotte, Anthony Fox, was eloquent and effective in raising the profile of equity considerations here at the department. Highways that went through majority black neighborhoods, transit decisions that left entire communities out. Shame on us if we don't do a better job with a new generational level of investment than we did in past eras as a country. And as for climate, look, we're all going to be suffering the consequences if we don't act on climate. But the great news is a good jobs bill, a good infrastructure bill can have enormous climate benefit too. To me, that's a win-win that people across the aisle should be able to support.
Switching topics briefly here, a new NBC News poll shows that just about every demographic, Democrat, Republican, urban, rural, Protestant, Catholic, supports protecting gay, lesbian, trans community from any sort of discrimination. Yet we are seeing state lawmakers across the country, including right here in North Carolina, target trans kids when it comes to sports. Are you optimistic about these issues, especially when it comes to, say, the Equality Act, which I think is right now in the Senate?
I believe that compassion, decency, and equality are going to win out. You know, it's hard to think of a more vulnerable kind of American than a trans kid who just wants to play soccer or be able to go to the bathroom like everybody else. Really basic things that any human being wants as they go through life. Now, every time there's been a move toward equality, some people have said, oh, you can't do it because everything will fall apart. And every time they predict that, it turns out to be false. The state of North Carolina, like the state of Indiana, my home state, have sometimes in the past made headlines in the wrong way around these issues. But I see enormous progress today. And I do hope that here in Washington, people do the right thing. Because as you said, most Americans, no matter your religious background or party affiliation, most Americans get that it's wrong to mistreat somebody because of who they are or because of who they love.
And that NBC News polling bearing that out. Finally, if I can ask for some advice, you and Chasten tied the knot a few years ago. My partner Brad and I getting married in a few months in front of our loving, supportive families. I'll take any pointers whatsoever when it comes to guidance on wedded bliss.
Well, that's always a work in progress, but I'd say just like in government, listening goes a long way. And as for the wedding, as long as your guests aren't too hot or cold and have some food, and know what's expected of them, then I think you can count on a great time. Congratulations to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, temperature control and listening, the big things. I'll take that to heart. All right, U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Secretary, thank you as always. Come back.
Thank you.
Take care.